The Meze Imperials and Meze Elites are two of my favourite all-time headphones, so you can imagine my excitement when I heard about the release of the Meze Lirics here, and I had high hopes for them being equally as wonderful a headphone. But are they? Let's explore. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and Merry Christmas or Happy Boxing Day, Happy Holidays, wherever you are in the world. If you're watching this when it's released, I hope you're having a wonderful time with family, friends and celebrations. As I said in the intro, the Meze Lirics were a headphone that I was very excited to get my hands on, and I have to say that I've had fairly mixed experiences with them, which I'll detail in this review. It's not to say they're bad, it's not to say they're great, there's a bit more to it in this case. The Lirics are a $2,000 US closed back headphone from Meze Audio. They use what's called an isodynamic driver, a very similar design to what's in the Meze Elite and Meze Imperial, but scaled down and with some new technology added in, which does make them a little bit different from the Elites and the Imperials. That scaled down isodynamic driver, which is similar to planar magnetic, it comes in with a 30 ohm impedance and a 100 decibel sensitivity. So these are very easy to drive, much like the Elites and the Imperials. They'll reward you for quality of source, but they don't need lots of power. A big part of the driver redesign was to make these a compact and lightweight headphone, and they certainly are. They're relatively small and they're relatively light, which makes them very easy to wear for extended periods. Another part of the redesign is that on the inside of these, within the driver setup itself, is a thing that Meze are calling PhaseX technology. Now it's not detailed on the website exactly how this works, but my understanding is it's designed to help all the different sounds arrive at your ears at the same time to improve things like spatial and transient information to maximize the qualities of the sound, particularly in terms of space and imaging, which is very important for closed back in particular because they're often more closed in due to the fact that they've got those closed backs. I can't explain exactly how it's working or what it's doing, but I do believe it's having a good impact because, as we'll get to soon, the spatial qualities from the Lirics are exceptional. A couple of other things to talk about is the way the earpads are fitted and the fact that they're not user replaceable, or at least not yet. So there's been a bit of conversation on forums complaining about the fact that when you're spending $2,000 on a pair of headphones, you want them to last for a long time, and that often requires changing over the earpads. The reason that's not possible with the Lirics is that Meze have come up with a genius idea of routing some of the volume that would normally be within the housings here back into the pads themselves. So there's some kind of venting on the inside of each of these cups that feeds some of the airflow back inside the pads, so into the foam within the pads. That's allowed them to keep the shell of the headphones more compact, but it does mean that you can't just click off the earpads like you can on something like the Elite or the Imperials. I have seen comment from Meze representatives though that in future there will be ways to replace the earpads. They're glued in place and there will be a kit available where you can change the pads and re-glue the new ones on. So all is not lost there, it will be possible in the future. I'm not sure if it's because of the design of the earpads or if there's other tricks going on, but while we're talking about these being closed and airflow and the size of the cups, it's worth mentioning that the isolation from the Lirics is ridiculous. It's like you've put on a pair of active noise cancelling headphones, but these are not in any way active. When you put these on though, the whole world disappears. It's almost a little bit disconcerting, but I mean that in a good way. It's going to let you just focus in and enjoy the music you're listening to. To put this into context, I've got a short clip here of a bit of pink noise playing and then putting on 3 different headphones, including the Lirics, so you can hear the difference as I move through different closed back cans. I'll play it for you now. To finish up talking about the design of these headphones, there's just a couple more things worth noting. First and foremost, they're spectacularly built, as we've all come to expect from Meze. They've got these beautiful metal bodies that are finished in this lovely sort of soft touch magnesium paint that's quite similar to what's on a lot of cameras. It's a really nice finish that's also apparently going to be really hard wearing. You can also see here this little vent, which is very similar in design to the Meze Ray Pentas, the IEMs, and that's designed to allow a little bit of airflow and make sure that the driver is properly damped and allowed to move in the way it needs to. And then when you look on the inside of the spline here that the headband moves up and down on, the design of the machine work is just spectacular. The level of detail that Meze go to on these sorts of kind of secondary items is just phenomenal. And it's one of those things where when you look at the headphone, you feel like you've gotten incredible value for money because of the attention and the focus that's gone into not just making them sound great, but look and feel great too. Rounding all that out, we've got a lovely leather headband with some nice padding underneath. We've got multiple pads there that allow some airflow in between the pads, both across the top of the head, but also along the top of the head. And it does make them very, very comfortable for extended wear. I think the only thing missing that some people might want from a headphone like this is they don't collapse in any way. The cups swivel so you can put them flat, but they don't fold in on themselves or anything like that, like say a DCA Noir. Speaking of carrying them around though, there are some other accessories we should talk about. The first thing I'll mention, because we're talking about carrying them around, is the carry case you get. It's a nice solid hard case, it's fairly compact in the scheme of things, as much as they could probably make it without a folding headphone, and you've got space inside to store your headphones and any cable you might carry with you. Speaking of cables, there's a couple of choices there too, and both of them come with the headphones as standard. The cables themselves are both identical, it's just a question of different lengths. And the cables are fine, they're not exceptional. I've come to expect that most brands these days don't give you exceptional cables as a standard, but what's coming with the Lirics is perfectly serviceable. I have tried the Lirics with a couple of other cables and I didn't notice a huge leap in sound quality, which is a very good thing. That means these are a good enough cable to get the most out of the headphone you bought them with. The cables provided are a 1.5 meter cable that I'm holding here and a 3 meter cable that I've left in the box. So you've essentially got a desktop cable and a portable cable. The terminations on these are all nice, they're metal terminations, it's a nice rubberized cable, it uses a 3.5mm connector to go into the headphone itself, and there's really nothing to complain about. It's not exceptional, but it's perfectly good enough. Perhaps the only thing that would have been nice to see would have been some kind of balanced option, a 2.5mm or a 4.4mm termination with a fly lead. If you're going to be using these with a high-end dongle device or a digital audio player, there's a good chance you're going to be able to use balanced, and you're going to want to use balanced because that's going to be where the performance lies. So it is a shame that that hasn't been provided with some form of balanced cable, and it could have been as simple as putting different terminations on both cables, as I said 2.5 or 4.4, and a simple fly lead. So that's one knock for me against what's provided, but it's not a deal breaker, and there's plenty of easily accessible 3.5mm twin entry cables that will suit the Lirics just fine. Options like Heart Audio cables and the Apos Flow cable that I reviewed before here on the channel, both would be great, as would many others out there on the market. And so let's get now to what you're really wanting to know, which is how the Lirics sound. The first thing I'd say about the Lirics, and the first thing that struck me about the Lirics, was that their tonality is a little bit off natural. It's not quite as natural and organic a sound as I've become used to from Meze. It's not bad, and it's not way off natural, but it's definitely got its own sort of sound characteristic that, for me at least, I really noticed on first listen. They've got a really big lift in the sub bass that cuts off pretty sharply before 200 Hz. And for me that leaves them feeling just a little bit lightweight in the lower range of the mids. Now I'm not suggesting they should be quite as full-bodied as something like the Empyreans, which did at times go too far, even though I personally loved them. But these have gone a little bit too far in the other direction, so all of the weight is right down in the sub bass, and they just miss a little bit of body and warmth in some of the upper bass or lower mid sounds. That said, the sense of extension in the bass is absolutely bottomless, and the sub bass from these things is ridiculously enjoyable. It gives this sense of energy and rhythm to music that's still quite subtle, but very enjoyable. Ultimately for me, I would have loved to hear that boost that's all the way down low just extend a little bit higher, pushing up a bit closer to 200 Hz. As it is, there's quite a strong dip around 200 Hz, and I think that's the source of what I'm personally not enjoying quite as much about the lyrics. Moving away from the bass, things like detail retrieval and resolution are very, very good for a headphone at this level. They're not at flagship levels like the Elite or the Susvara, but they're very, very good. It's one of those things where you'd never notice any missing details if you're not comparing it with a true flagship, and certainly if you're coming from most other closed-back headphones on the market, these are going to absolutely wow you. What that also means is you're getting a great sense of clarity and texture all through the mid-range. Female vocals in particular are right on the mark with a perfect sense of tonality and texture and breathiness and air. They're really, really exceptional. I would, and this kind of goes back to what I've already said, I would like a bit more weight and richness in some male vocals, but it's not way off the mark, it's just a little bit off for my tastes. With that beautiful sense of detail retrieval and clarity that they do have, it also lends to, as I've already alluded to, excellent imaging and soundstage presentation. The amount of space these produce, for me, is significantly better than something like the DCA Stealth, which costs twice as much. Now, I didn't have the Stealths here side by side at the time that I got the Lyrics, but I will talk about what I believe would be my comparison between the two in just a moment. Before we get there though, I want to highlight the fact that the image focus from the Lyrics is exceptional, particularly for a closeback, but just in general. Laying in bed, listening to some music before I went to sleep a couple of nights, there was a great sense of space and separation between sounds, and every individual sound was just absolutely razor sharp focus. It allows you to kind of explore the music, listen through it in different ways, and really enjoy the track you're listening to from a technical perspective. I'll talk about immersion and engagement in a moment, but generally speaking, these are technically amazing. Width and depth in the soundstage are also strong, and I'd say particularly strong for a closed back. These are going to compete with a lot of open backs on the market, and that gives you an idea of just how strong they therefore are as a closed back headphone. And as always, I'll put that in context with a couple of comparisons in a moment. The final thing I do want to talk about though is the overall treble presentation. I've alluded to it a little bit, talking about things like space and image focus and the sense of clarity and detail and air in vocals. But it is worth knowing that these have a slightly enhanced treble. The enhancement is specifically in the upper end of the treble, around say 10 kHz, and so it doesn't tend to get sibilant, but it can be just a little bit too much sometimes. During my listening, the peak in here occasionally meant that the lyrics just danced right on the edge of fatigue for me. It had me reaching quite often for the volume just to pull it back a notch or two on certain tracks. And that's where I also think just a tiny bit more weight in the bass would have helped to offset that treble peak just a little bit better. So as you can probably start to tell as you're hearing me talk about these, I'm equal parts in love and repelled by the Meze Lirics. I thoroughly enjoyed them multiple evenings in a row, using the Chord Mojo to listen to a couple of albums in bed before I went to sleep. They were absolutely great in that setup. But then I'd bring them into my office for during my daily work, and I'd have them plugged into things like the TT2 or the Soloist GT, and I was finding I wasn't enjoying them as much. Now that might have been because it was focused listening at night versus more background listening during the day, and the energy and the presence and the clarity that these bring to the sound is probably just a little bit too much for background listening. But it's left me with very mixed feelings on the lyrics. I respect them deeply. I think they're an incredibly designed, incredible sounding headphone from a technical point of view. I just don't know if I love them enough that I'd want to own them and reach for them regularly to listen to them. I certainly enjoyed my time with them a lot more than I enjoyed my time recently with the Dan Clark Audio Stealths. If someone offered to give me a pair of either of those, despite double the price going towards the Stealth, I'd take the Lyrics every time. On the other hand, if you put in front of me a pair of Aeon 2 closed, or I actually also have a pair of Aeon 2 Noirs coming, then that might be a harder decision. I do think at times the lack of weight in those lower mids, upper bass regions just holds me back from loving these, and I don't mean that from the point of view that I like a warm, rich and bassy sound a lot of the time. I mean even from a general perspective, I just think the tonal balance isn't quite right from the lyrics because of that big dip in the upper bass. And so now let me give you a couple of comparisons to really clarify what I mean. My favourite closed-back headphone for some time now, and partly by default because I'm still hunting for a closed-back that I really love, but I do very much enjoy the Beyerdynamic T5 3rd generation. These are only $1,000 US, so they're half the price of the lyrics. And in comparing the two, it's clear that the Lyrics are the technically superior headphone. But in terms of enjoyment, it probably comes down to track a lot of the time for me. One of the particular tracks I listened to during this comparison was You Made Me Love You by Harry Nilsson. On this track, which has an orchestra playing behind the main vocals, the separation between the vocals and the orchestra from the lyrics was just exceptional. You really got a sense of the vocalist standing in the foreground and the orchestra spread out behind. The T5 brings a more intimate presentation that's still enjoyable, but it did some interesting things with the way the sound was laid out in the soundstage. And it was actually almost like you were standing on the stage on a flat, low surface, and then you had the orchestra almost in raked seating up in front of you. All of a sudden there was a sense of height through the orchestra that wasn't really natural, and it distracted me a bit from the listening experience. I also found the T5s to slightly overdo the warmth and richness in this track. It wasn't unenjoyable by any stretch, but it's definitely not natural. If you're happy just to sit back and let the music flow past in a really relaxing way, the T5s are great. That said, I was feeling a sense of lack of texture and clarity at times from the T5s in comparison to these. And funnily enough, I also found that the treble peaks from the T5s occasionally became a little bit more aggressive than what I was hearing from the Lyrics. So the Lyrics probably are the better balanced overall headphone, but that's not saying a great deal given how strongly coloured the T5s are. And I like that about them, but I recognise it is a shortcoming from sort of a technical point of view. And where that left it for me is that no doubt the Lyrics are the better headphone, but I didn't feel like I'd be comfortable selling the T5s to buy the Lyrics when both have their own shortcomings. That for me was going to be a step too far and kind of shows where I sit with the Lyrics. Now I thought I was going to be wrapping up the review here, but then channel patron Brocco Lee offered me a short-term loan of his ZMF closeds. This makes for a much better comparison because now we've got a $2,500 closeback up against a $2,000 closeback headphone. The Verite closed have a fairly legendary status and I was really excited to get my hands on them. By the way, I will have a full review coming in the near future, so make sure you subscribe and stay tuned for that one. First and foremost, when you look at the two headphones, there is no doubt that the Lyrics are a far more portable choice. So do keep that in mind. If portability is important, the Verite closed aren't a particularly good option. But if you're just buying closebacks for listening late at night and not disturbing other people, or maybe listening in an office environment, then you could choose either, and here goes the comparison. One of the tracks I listened to for this one was Savage Night by the Blue Hawaiians. Listening to the VCs on this track, that's the Verite closed, they were smooth but wonderfully detailed as well. The opening of this track has some short, sharp instrumental stings, and you could beautifully hear from the Verite closed the resonance and the ringing and the echo of those sounds within the line recording space. When the congas come in, the Verites nailed the tonality of those just perfectly. The guitars had a wonderful balance of attack and also tonal richness and resonance. And so as you can tell, overall, things were sounding pretty good. Probably the only place I'd criticise the VCs here was that to me the saxophone came across just a little bit dry, and that could be the recording. I don't have any way of knowing. Flipping over to the Lyrics though, things became a lot more aggressive and energetic. It became a little bit hard to listen to at times after coming from something as smooth as the Verite closed. Now of course I gave myself time to adjust and get used to each of the different headphones as I switched back and forth, because sometimes just the contrast can be enough to make one headphone sound better or worse. But even with extended listening, I still felt like the Lyrics were just a little bit too aggressive. The hi-hats in this track became a bit overemphasized by the treble peak on the Lyrics. But on the flip side, things like the congas sounded fantastic again, and surprisingly, the saxophone sounded better from the Lyrics. It actually sounded a bit richer and warmer, which is surprising given what I've already said about these two headphones. Having said that, the guitars that sounded so great on the VCs were now a bit too aggressive and lacking in a bit of the richness of their harmonics. So it's very much a trade-off here. You're getting some things better with the Lyrics, but not enough things better with the Lyrics, in my opinion. I found that the VC, whilst maybe not perfect because I don't think any headphone is, it definitely came closer to a true and natural representation of all the different tonalities of the instruments involved. The Lyric for me hit certain highlights and took them higher than what the VC could deliver, but overall the experience was a lesser one compared to the VC. Both of these headphones are great. I don't want to suggest that the Lyrics aren't an excellent headphone, but they're going to really appeal to people that want a more aggressive, energetic, and detail-oriented sound. And where this left me after lots of listening to the lyrics, listening to other headphones as well, is that I think they're a headphone that can be quite track and source dependent. If you've got aggressively recorded tracks and or an aggressively tuned system, these could go too far. But if you enjoy that energy and you enjoy the attack, you like that real sub-bass kick, these are absolutely fantastic in those areas. But to me, there's a bit of a trade-off of overall naturality and the ability to relax into the music sometimes. Paired up with a richer source like a Chord Mojo or even a tube amp, the lyrics have the ability to be a very, very enjoyable listen. They can be exciting and engaging, but just not so much relaxing for those times you want the music to take a back seat. As I said, these aren't a headphone that has me feeling compelled to sell off other gear and find a way to purchase. When it comes time to send them back in a few days, I'll be a little bit sad to see them go, but I think they're a headphone I'm pretty quickly going to forget and move on. And that's generally a good test for me of just how great a headphone is whether or not I feel like I want to buy it after spending time with it, and or how sad I'll be to send it back. The lyrics for me are a headphone, as I said, I respect, I appreciate, I would recommend to certain people in certain circumstances, but they don't get a wholehearted recommendation from me. I do think they're one of the very best closebacks on the market, but I also think that the closeback market is a pretty difficult one to find the right headphone. Until I tried the Verite closed, I'd felt like most closeback headphones have too much of a trade-off in one area or the other and never quite land on what I feel is a really great sound. That's not to say I can't enjoy a number of closebacks, but I don't find myself drawn to them in the same way as some of the great openbacks out there. And that's very much true for the lyrics as well. They're strong, they can be incredibly enjoyable at times, but they can also miss the mark at times too. So I wouldn't say not to buy them, but I would say make sure you're clear about what you want and what you're getting with the lyrics. If you like that energetic sound, if you like that rich, punchy sub-bass, but a more neutral and almost lean upper bass, if that's what you're looking for and you need something compact and closed back, then these are a wonderful headphone. If you want something smoother and richer though, with probably a better overall tonal balance, then do stay tuned for the review of the Verite closed. As always, I hope you found this review useful. If you have, I'd love it if you'd hit subscribe and like. It really helps the channel continue to grow and continue to share videos like this with you. For now though, I'll leave you to the music, so happy listening and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.